Page 74. Just as Kant cannot justify in all rigor the importation of the analytic of judgment, he cannot justify the order he follows in the application of the frame, of the four categories of the analytic of concepts. No more than with the transport of the table, for example the frame, does the order of the exposition here manage to rationalize its interest philosophically. Its motivation hides behind the arbitrariness of philosophical decree. The exposition begins with the group of the two mathematical categories, quantity and quality. This latter reversal is explained, to be sure, by the fact that knowledge is neither the end nor the effect of the judgment of taste. Quantity, here universality, is not the first value of a judgment of taste. End of the note. It is the moment of quality that I have examined first, because it is the one that the aesthetic judgment of the beautiful takes into consideration first. Quality, the disinterested character, is the very thing that determines the formality of the beautiful object. It must be pure of all attraction, of all seductive power. It must provoke no emotion, promise no enjoyment.
You always have to go back to Kant's essential view on what is beautiful. The framework or the theory of his frame is that you have to detach from your intellectual understanding and your sensory experience. So once you detach yourself from your intellectual understanding or knowledge, and you also detach from your personal interests, which is a sensual experience. How do we function? As a typical American, you tell somebody to do that. So I can't think, I can't feel, well, I'm as good as I'm dead. So that's the essence of Kant's judgment, so-called, a judgment of aesthetics. That means you have to be detached. For the modern people today, we become a little more contaminated. I wouldn't say influenced, or contaminated by the Eastern philosophy. There's something we call the detachment. Whether it's a Taoist idea or Zen Buddhism idea, or whatever. It's an Eastern idea. We don't really know anything about it. What we do know is something called a detachment. So you have to detach. In a Western way, we do have something called a transcendental state, a state of mind. That's what Kant tries to propose here, this midglut. So what the midglut leads to is the water, English as judgment. A term, as we say in English, judgment. That judgment is not what you understand as you normally think what the judgment means in English. So that idea of judgment is somehow depending on the idea of detachment. Once you detach from your sensual experience, from your intellectual understanding, you should be in a place, you'll see something different. But we don't really know that. How does that work? We don't know. As Derrida continues to go on the specific terms that Kant provided here, quantity and quality, it's more or less in mathematical categories. Here's the problem. You need to transcend or detach yourself from your intellect and from your sense. How are you going to be transcended to the state of mind that you can appreciate something beyond your common view of life, which is intellectual or emotional? He drags you back to the mathematical terms, quantity and quality. That's already a problem because when you go on that kind of level of understanding, you're already going on more intellectual. But then when you go more intellectual, you ended up with a mathematical sense. And that becomes mechanical. That's the problem. Kind of like an intellectual acrobatical game. You ended up become a pure intellectual exercise, which is a mathematical exercise. If your intellectual understanding and your emotional experience of something are completely detached, then what do you have? Become mechanical. The higher level of mechanical is mathematical. So where's the beautiful in there? We don't really know what that is.
Page 76 and 77. The non-conceptual resembles the conceptual, a very strange resemblance, a singular proximity or affinity, which somewhere draws out of mimesis an interpretation of the beautiful, which firmly rejects imitation. There is no contradiction here, which is not reappropriated by the economy of physis, as mimesis. The judgment of taste relates to a purely formal finality, without concept and without end. Without a conceptual and determinate representation of an end, the two mathematical categories are nonetheless indispensable. Sound and color are excluded as attractions only to the extent of their non-formality, their materiality. As pure forms, sound and color can give rise to a universal appreciation. In conformity with the quantity of a judgment of taste, they can procure a disinterested pleasure, conforming to the quality of a judgment of taste. The sensations of color, the sensations of sound and color can quite rightly be held to the extent that they are pure. This determination of purity concerns only the form, which alone can be universally communicable with certainty. According to Kant, there are two ways of acceding to formal purity: by a non-sensory, non-sensual reflection, and by the regular play of impressions. If one assumes with Euler that colors are vibrations of the ether, pulses, at regular intervals, and if formal analogy between sounds and colors, sounds consist in a regular rhythm in the vibrations of the disturbed ether. Kant had a great deal of difficulty coming to a conclusion on this point, but the fact remains that on this hypothesis one would be dealing not with material contents of received sensations, but with formal determinations. This is why simple color is pure color and can therefore belong inside the beautiful, giving rise to the universally communicable appreciations. Mixed colors cannot do this. The empiricist motive that simple color does not give rise to a transmissible perception seems to have been inverted, but it is here not a question of determinate perception, but only of pleasure or unpleasure.
As we remember, Kant assigned each nation to different places. Everything has to be a very specific way, but everything has also to be ambiguous at the same time. So essentially, Kant still has to draw on the Greek idea mimesis. But at the same time, he rejects imitation. Mimesis, a different word, is imitation. If mimesis rejects imitation, this is a problem. But I think, again, because the modern world today, the Western world, is so much contaminated by the Eastern idea, we bought into the idea nothing is everything, from the Buddhism and the Hinduism, Taoism. We don't even really understand what that means, but immediately we see match the Kantian idea. So this is great. This must be universal. And we're talking about this very mysterious term, judgment of taste. That taste has to be based on detachment of pleasure or unpleasure. And that's the first. And the second thing is that everything has to be pure color and the pure sound. As Derrida says here, mixed colors cannot do this. And it's kind of funny the way he writes, but really the truth is, Kant gives you this really crazy idea. And you just wonder why, after almost 300 years, no one ever questioned it. Derrida is the first guy to challenge him, saying, hey, pure color, pure sound can't work because the pure sound does not do anything. How are you going to make a pure sound? Sounds are mixed, and that's why we're touched. You make a melody, you make some sort of arrangement, and the colors, you have to mix colors. That's where you get some sort of sensational or even intellectual reflection. Pure color, one color does not do anything. Even so many pure colors together probably wouldn't do as much. There are going to be the times when colors are mixed, you can't tell what that is. That's where you feel something or you see something. I'm trying to find out in the old writings anywhere indicated what was Kant's favorite music or paintings in his time. There are very little results. The question Kant's real ability to even understand the painting and the music. We've been glorifying him for so many years. That's something I begin to really deeply question. How much this guy really knows things.
Page 78 and 79. The prosthesis, which does not run along as though on wheels in the third critique, as soon as one looks a little more closely at the example, that example of an example, which forms and is formed by the frame. If things run as though on wheels, this is perhaps because things aren't going so well. By reason of an internal infirmity in the thesis which demands to be supplemented by a prosthesis, or only ensures the progress of the exposition with the aid of a wheelchair or a child's pushchair. Thus, one pushes forward something which cannot stand up, does not erect itself by itself in its process. Framing always supports and contains that which, by itself, collapses forthwith. This is demonstrated by example, by the problem of the example, and the reflective judgment. Now, what does the critique of pure reason tell us? That examples are the wheelchairs, roulettes of judgment. The French translators sometimes say the crutches of judgment, but it really is wheelchairs, not skateboards, but the little wheeled cars in which children, the old, or the sick are pushed. Those who have not enough judgment, enough good sense, that faculty of natural judgment, the best shared thing. This is not the sensus communis of the third critique. That is called, in Kant's word, Mutterwitz. Those who do not have enough of this maternal wits, the sick, imbeciles, need wheelchairs. Examples. Examples are thus the wheelchairs of the faculty of judging, and those who lack this natural talent will not be able to do without them. The wheelchairs, however, do not replace judgment. Nothing can replace the Mutterwitz, the lack of which cannot be supplied by any school. The exemplary wheelchairs are thus prostheses, which replace nothing, which can make one lose one's head suddenly. A Russian roulette, if one puts into play pleasure without enjoyment. The death drive of the morning of labor in the experience of the beautiful, of the paragon. Get one's morning done.
Essentially, this idea of judgment, famous Kantian judgment, that it needs a wheelchair. This idea of judgment is for the deformed, handicapped people. This is to say we are either deformed or Kant wrote his book for people who possess a much higher intellectual ability, which reminds me what Heidegger said in 1950s interview, that he thinks of a special inner kinship between the German language and the language of the Greeks and their thought. This is something that the French confirm for me again and again today when they begin to think they speak German. They assure me that they do not succeed with their own language. So at the end, it becomes the Russian game. What do you call it? Roulette. In this case, when you get into intense philosophical discourse, you're trying to figure out something just as bad as a Russian roulette. You play the Russian roulette, you'll die or you'll not die. When you get into the serious philosophical discourse in your mind, it's the same thing. There's really no difference. And that ties into this whole idea of German idealism. Now, we say idealism, but actually it's idealism. It's all in your mind. That's what it is. As you can see how crazy Kantian idea is, but you also should see how crazy you are cultivated and embedded with this kind of crazy idea. I mean, that's the value of our study here. Derrida made a very good conclusion here. Kant talks about the categories of judgment. How do you proceed to appreciate the beauty? After the detailed discussion here, the conclusion is, after all, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to frame a perfume. I think it's a genius phrase here. We think about this from beginning to today. We've been reading 80 pages of this book. From the very beginning, that it started with the idiom about the Cézanne's painting. Tell me the truth in painting. As you start, you say, man, this is weird. After you continue to read to this point, you begin to see all the pages begin to make sense. Because if you're going to read a Kant's book, even you are patient, have enough stamina to continue read his book, you will get lost, because to a point, you're not going to be able to make any sense of that, because you are already programmed. You're prepared by your education, social education, that Kant is a great philosopher, and you will not question or challenge anything he says. Really, you're not concerned about what you really think. What you're concerning is that other people would say to challenge Kant, who do you think you are? See, there are going to be a lot of people in the same mindset as you are. You do not think that in the world there are some people who are much smarter than you are. They might figure this out. In fact, at the Kant's writing level, there are only going to be few people, either they do understand or they don't. And most people don't. And so when you don't understand, it's because you don't know how to read his book. You are not prepared enough to read his book. So if you're not prepared when you read it, you feel basically terrorized because you can't rebel, you can't make any comments. You feel you are insufficient. It makes you very insecure, so you can't make any judgment. Because you're going to say, I don't even understand what he's saying. How am I going to make any judgment? But the question is that because you're not prepared to read his book, you read it line by line, words by words, it's going to make sense to you. It does not work that way. You needed to have a much bigger scope of the event. You need to know, as Derrida earlier says, that when you look at a piece of artwork, you can go from multiple directions. You have different perspectives every direction you move. You are allowed to do that. That's how you look at a piece of art. If you look at a sculpture, you are encouraged to go walk around and look at the whole thing. In fact, even the painting is flat, but you also encouraged from different angle and different sides and different distances to look at the painting. So what does that mean? That means that you are given time to look at this event left or right, front or back. But for whatever the reason we have now, we can't do that to a book. You cannot read a book backwards, obviously. You can read the chapter, you jump chapters. You can even jump pages. But then what you're going to find out is the more you jump, less you understand. Makes it more difficult. That's why I think somebody like Derrida is a genius, the way he reads the book. Because he already understood Kant's problem. That's why he prepared this playground. He started from the very edge, take you walking every yard of the playground, show you all the details, and then begins to tell you what is the playground for. So from the day when we've been reading to today, you would get something if you have enough stamina and courage to go this far. Get some kind of a glimpse there. But the thing is this. You need to understand what is Kant's essential idea. What is the one word, one phrase that can capture Kantian essence? And most people don't make you go that far. They can't go that far themselves. Derrida, obviously, he sees everything through and he can give you one phrase to tell you one big book what that means. But he's not going to tell you that. Because if he does, but I don't think so. That's all you have to say. We live in the world of freedom. Everybody entitles right and comment. But the truth is that everybody is so blind. What matters, you have the right or have the comment. It doesn't really matter. That's what makes Derrida writes big books. He's going to tell you these things are not that simple. There's one question you have to read 500 pages. But if anybody can read the 500 pages, then you wouldn't have much question because you're going to just sit there and be quiet to learn. Only because most people don't even bother to read. You have so many questions. So my point is that you need to learn. But of course, today we have AI. You can go on Google, you type a phrase or type a question. You say, what is the essential idea of Kant? The AI cannot tell you that. Because AI gathers all the other people's comments and then put together, select everything, and pick the most possible answers and the words and then put together, tell you. So you're still hearing from the common people's view. If you want to ask a question, does Kantian aesthetic view or aesthetic principle work? The answer is yes, it does for people in wheelchair. And you're not going to hear that from any AI or any professors because they wouldn't dare to say that. So in terms of the Kant's view of aesthetic, how to appreciate the beauty, and what is the beauty or what is the beautiful in Derrida's words, that would be you're trying to frame a perfume. That's the whole idea of Kant's aesthetic view or aesthetic principle work.